In a Chicago federal courtroom, Lucien Dragovic, Mafia boss, tech mogul, and the most dangerous man in the room, just watched a judge hand him everything: the company, the mansions, the accounts. Every dollar Celeste Rowan spent 9 years building. He rigged the entire trial, paid the psychiatrist, forged the records, bought the witnesses, and when that gavel fell, he smiled like a king who had finally buried the only person who ever truly knew him. He should have checked what she was handing her lawyer on the way out. If you've never watched a man's empire collapse in real time, stay until the end. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Shut. The morning of the final divorce hearing, Celeste Rowan woke at 4:45 without an alarm. She lay flat on her back in the narrow bed of a studio apartment on West Monroe Street, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked like nothing and everything at the same time. The sheets beneath her were cheap cotton, the kind that pill after 3 washes. 6 weeks ago, she had been sleeping in a California king with a heated mattress pad and triple blackout curtains in a 4,000-square-foot penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. Now she had a space heater that clicked when the temperature dropped and a refrigerator that hummed too loud for the square footage. She didn't move for 11 minutes, just breathed, counted the seconds between exhales the way she had taught herself in the years she spent locked in rooms with Lucien Dragovic, while he rewrote her ideas in front of her face and signed his name to all of them. Control the breath. Control the room. That was the discipline. The rest would follow. She got up, made coffee with a drip machine she'd bought at a Walgreens for $14, and stood at the single window looking out over the street below. October in Chicago. The trees had gone skeletal. The sidewalk was wet from rain that had passed through at 3 in the morning, and the streetlights caught the puddles and turned them amber. A delivery truck was already double parked across the intersection, hazards blinking in a slow pulse, and Celeste watched it without really seeing it. What she was seeing, in the clean space behind her eyes, was the server room on the 42nd floor of the Dragotech Tower. The layout, the camera positions, the blind spot between Rack 7 and Rack 9 that she had intentionally designed into the security architecture 3 years ago when she already knew, not suspected, knew, that the man she had married at 26 was not going to let her leave clean. She had not told anyone about the blind spot. She had not told anyone about a lot of things. By 5:30 she was dressed. Dark charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back without ornamentation. She looked like a woman walking into a deposition, which was exactly what she was. She did not look like a woman who had spent the previous 6 weeks methodically disassembling a mafia boss's criminal infrastructure from the inside out, while he used his lawyers and his money and his forged psychiatric records to strip her of everything in open court. She looked like exactly what Lucien believed her to be: beaten. She had worked very hard to look like that. Her attorney, Marcus Webb, was waiting for her in the lobby of the courthouse on South Dearborn at 7:58. He was 61 years old, wore suits that were always slightly too large for his frame, and had a way of standing very still when other people were moving fast that Celeste had come to recognize as his version of confidence. He had never worked a mafia case before she hired him. He had also never lost a fraud case in 23 years of practice, and Celeste had decided that the second credential mattered more than the first. He looked at her when she came through the door. Just looked, for a moment, the way you look at something you're still not entirely sure is structurally sound. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some," she said. "The drive is with the paralegal. She's got it in a sealed evidence bag inside a locked briefcase." "Good. Celeste." He stopped. He had a habit of saying her name first when he was about to say something he wasn't fully comfortable with. After today, regardless of how it goes, this becomes a federal matter. You understand what that means? "It means I stop being the problem and start being the witness," she said. He nodded slowly. "They're going to want everything, every system you built, every access you maintained. I know what I agreed to. I'm asking if you know what it costs." She looked at him evenly. "Marcus, I know what it costs. I built the cost into the math 2 months ago. Let's go." He didn't say anything else. They rode the elevator up in silence. The courtroom was already half full when they entered. Lucien's side of the gallery was populated with the particular species of Chicago money that circulates around power the way remora circle sharks, not feeding, not fighting, just attached. Three of the men in the back row Celeste recognized as members of his inner corporate circle. Two more she recognized from a different context. One she had spent years pretending she didn't see. His lead attorney, Barrett Cole, was already at the plaintiff's table arranging papers with the methodical calm of a man who had never lost a case. He was paid enough to win. Lucian arrived at 8:17. He came through the side entrance with two members of his security detail, both of whom stopped at the door per protocol and crossed the courtroom with the particular walk that Celeste had once found magnetic and now recognized as performance. Controlled, unhurried. The walk of a man who believed every room he entered had already been arranged in his favor, because for 19 years, every room had been. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Celeste's monthly rent on her current apartment. His hair was perfect, his jaw was clean-shaved, and when he turned and his eyes found her across the room, he did what she had expected him to do. He smiled, not a warm smile, a consolidating smile, the kind a chess player makes in the moment before removing the last piece from the board. Celeste looked at him for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away. This was also discipline. The proceedings opened at 9 sharp. Judge Harriet Okonkwo was 54 years old, had been on the federal bench for 11 years, and had a reputation for running a courtroom with the affect of a woman who had heard every possible version of human dishonesty and was no longer impressed by any of it. She reviewed the documentation on the preliminary motions without visible emotion, denied 2 objections from Webb on grounds he had anticipated, and moved directly into the asset ruling. Barrett Cole stood and delivered it the way you deliver a verdict you've already paid for. He was smooth, he was methodical. He referenced the psychiatric evaluation, prepared by Dr. Franklin Voss, board-certified, impeccable credentials, that characterized Celeste as suffering from a pattern of delusional financial behavior consistent with a diagnosis of bipolar I disorder with psychotic features. He referenced the forensic accounting report prepared by Lucian's contracted firm that documented, in granular detail, over $2.3 million in what the report characterized as erratic, unauthorized expenditures from corporate accounts under Celeste's access. He referenced 3 witnesses who had each appeared in prior hearings and provided sworn testimony describing incidents of instability, erratic conduct, and professional recklessness that they claimed to have personally witnessed over the preceding 18 months. He was very good. Celeste had spent considerable time over the past 6 weeks understanding exactly how good Barrett Cole was. Because understanding the architecture of a system you intend to destroy is the first requirement of destroying it cleanly. When Cole finished, Judge Okonkwo looked at Marcus Webb. Mr. Webb, any final statement before ruling on the asset division? Webb stood. He was unhurried in the way he always was, and he said, Your Honor, at this time I'd like to introduce newly discovered evidence material to the court's evaluation of the asset division ruling. The temperature in the room didn't change physically, but Celeste felt the shift in it, the way air moves differently when a door opens that wasn't supposed to open. Cole was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, the discovery period closed. The evidence in question, Webb continued, as if Cole had not spoken, was not accessible during the standard discovery period because it was stored within an encrypted partition of Dragotech's own proprietary server infrastructure, accessible only via a decryption protocol that my client maintains exclusively. Okonkwo held up one hand. Cole stopped. She looked at Webb. What is the nature of this evidence? Surveillance recordings, Your Honor, originating from the security system installed within Dragotech Corporation's primary server facility. Recordings that are directly relevant to the authenticity of the evidence submitted by the plaintiff in this proceeding. Lucian's composure did not move. He was still sitting with his hands flat on the table in front of him, weight back, posture perfect. But Celeste, who had spent 9 years learning to read the geography of his face, saw it, just for a fraction of a second. The stillness that is not calm, but its precise opposite. The freeze response of something that has just heard a sound it didn't expect in a place it believed was sealed. She looked away before he could catch her looking. Cole attempted 3 more objections. Okonkwo allowed the evidence. The paralegal, a 26-year-old named Devin Park, who had known the contents of that drive for exactly 4 days and had not slept well in any of them, carried the sealed briefcase to the clerk with steady hands. Celeste had told him what to expect. She had told him that the hardest part would not be seeing it, but hearing it, because audio hits the body differently than image. and what was on that drive was going to hit everyone in the room, whether they wanted it to or not. The courtroom's display system was older than it should have been for a federal facility, but it handled the file. The footage came up on the screen mounted above the witness stand. Server room, 42nd floor, Dragotech Tower. Shot from the camera position that caught the full alcove between Rack 7 and Rack 9. The timestamp in the lower right corner read 14 months ago. The resolution was excellent. Lucien Dragovich was in the frame within the first 8 seconds. Barrett Cole appeared 11 seconds later. A third man, Raymond Cho, Dragotech's chief financial officer, whom Lucien had personally recruited from a hedge fund in Singapore 7 years prior, entered the frame at the 40-second mark and closed the alcove door behind him. The audio was clean. Celeste had designed the server room acoustics herself. She had designed them to carry sound very well in that specific alcove. 3 years ago, when she still didn't know exactly what she would one day need to capture, but understood she would need to capture something. The 3 men in the recording spoke for 22 minutes and 41 seconds. In those 22 minutes and 41 seconds, Barrett Cole discussed, in specific procedural detail, the strategy of filing a psychiatric evaluation with a clinician, subsequently identified as Dr. Franklin Voss, who had agreed for a payment of $380,000 wired to an account in the Cayman Islands to provide a diagnosis of bipolar I disorder for a patient he had never examined. Raymond Cho outlined the method by which $23 million in Dragotech corporate funds had been moved through a series of shell companies and reattributed to accounts held under Celeste Rowan's maiden name, Celeste Navarro, creating a false paper trail that would survive standard forensic accounting review because it was built by the same firm that would later be hired to conduct the review. Lucien Dragovich, in a voice that was exactly as controlled and deliberate as it was in every conversation he had ever conducted in that building, confirmed the instruction to prepare a parallel package of fabricated federal evidence, forged communications, manufactured transaction records, planted digital fingerprints that would be used to file federal charges against Celeste if she attempted to contest the divorce outcome or reclaim any interest in the company. And then, in the final 4 minutes of the recording, Lucien said something that Cole had not scripted and Cho had not been prepared for. Something that he said in the private tone of a man speaking in a room he was certain was not being recorded. The way men always speak in the rooms they are certain are not being recorded. He said that the divorce was not primarily about the money. He said that Celeste was the only person alive outside of his inner syndicate who fully understood the encryption architecture that protected the financial infrastructure of his entire operation. He said that she had to be made legally, professionally, and reputationally inert before she could become a liability. He said that he had used the legal system to achieve what he could not achieve through the organization without creating unnecessary exposure, and that once the ruling was final, she would be too discredited, too financially destroyed, and too legally compromised to matter to anyone who might otherwise want to listen to her. He said, "She built the cage. I'm just locking it." The courtroom was very quiet when the footage ended. Celeste was looking at her hands, folded in her lap. She did not look at the screen. She did not look at Lucien. She had seen the footage 17 times in the past 6 weeks, and she had spent the first 8 of those viewings working through a version of grief that she did not have a clean name for. Not for the marriage, which had ended long before this proceeding, but for the specific and particular loss of believing, even partially, that the man had operated somewhere within the boundaries of comprehensible human motivation. He had not. He had never intended to. The recordings made that surgically clear. She had cried once, in the bathroom of a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks ago. She had allowed herself 11 minutes of it. Then she had washed her face with cold water, looked at herself in the scratched mirror above the sink, and gone back to work. What she felt now, sitting in the federal courtroom while the footage finished and the silence stretched out, and she heard the sound of Barrett Cole setting down his pen on the table with the controlled precision of a man who has just realized that every move he has remaining is losing, was not satisfaction. It was closer to the feeling of a completed equation, the variables resolved, the proof holding. Lucien turned his head and looked at her. For 9 years she had watched him look at rooms, at people, at problems. She had seen him look at competitors, at subordinates, at investigators, at prosecutors. She had seen every register of the way Lucien Dragovich looked at a situation that was moving against him. She had cataloged all of them. She had never seen this one. This was something new, something that had not previously been available in the architecture of his expressions, because it required a condition he had never previously experienced. The condition of understanding, completely and without exit, that the person across from him had been ahead of him for a long time. He stood up. Cole grabbed his arm, but Lucien shook him off. Celeste. His voice was very steady, the voice he used when steadiness was the last discipline remaining. Whatever you think this accomplishes, sit down, Mr. Dragovich, Judge Okonkwo said. He didn't sit down immediately. He kept his eyes on Celeste, and what came out of him then was not the composed boardroom language she had heard for 9 years, but something raw and less curated, something that had been underneath all of it for all of those years. I will give you whatever you want. You understand me? Whatever number you have in your head, it's yours. The technology, the patents, the licensing revenue, all of it, yours. You don't have to do this. Celeste looked at him for the first time since he had entered the courtroom that morning. Lucien, she said. Her voice was level, not cold, not warm, the voice of a woman who had already moved past the moment he was still standing in. You built the security system. I designed every lock inside it. She looked back at her hands. He sat down. What happened next happened with the procedural efficiency of a court that has been presented with evidence of its own process being corrupted, which is a particular species of institutional fury that moves faster than most people expect. Judge Okonkwo did not take a recess. She called Marcus Webb and Barrett Cole to the bench separately and briefly. She reviewed 4 documents that her clerk provided. She made 2 phone calls from the bench phone that she did not explain. She then returned to her position and looked out at the courtroom with the expression of a person who has just had something very expensive broken in her presence and is deciding how to respond. She overturned the asset division ruling in its entirety. She froze all corporate assets connected to Dragotech pending federal review. She ordered the immediate referral of the evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois. She then looked at the 4 deputies standing at the back of the room and said, in a tone that suggested she had been waiting some time to say it, I want Mr. Dragovich, Mr. Cole, and Mr. Cho detained pending arraignment. Barrett Cole, who had won 91 cases in a career spanning 3 decades, and who had, by his own admission at a bar association dinner 4 years ago, never been in a courtroom where he was on the losing side of the motion that actually mattered, did not resist. He sat very still while the deputy approached him, and Celeste watched him have the private reckoning of a man who has understood, somewhere beneath the professional insulation, that the thing he told himself he would never do is the thing he has been doing for a long time. Raymond Cho said something in a language Celeste didn't speak. She didn't need to. Lucien stood when the deputy reached him. He was still composed. He would be composed until he was alone, and then, Celeste understood, he would not be. She did not need to see that part. She had not designed this to see that part. He turned as the handcuff was placed on his right wrist and looked at her one more time across the courtroom. She had already looked away. She was looking at Marcus Webb, who was gathering documents with the unhurried precision of a man who has just won the motion that actually mattered. And she was thinking about what happened next. Not the federal investigation, not the asset recovery, not the coming weeks of depositions and disclosures, but the specific, immediate, practical question of what she was going to do with the afternoon, because she had planned everything up to this moment so completely and for so long that the moment itself felt less like an arrival than a door. And she was interested in a way she had not been interested in anything for 6 weeks, in what was on the other side of it. Outside, through the high windows of the federal courthouse, the October sky had gone the particular shade of gray that precedes rain in Chicago. Not dark, just covered, the whole city under a single flat cloud. The trees along South Dearborn had lost most of their leaves. The ones remaining were the color of old rust. Celeste picked up her bag from the floor beside her chair. She stood, straightened her jacket, and nodded once to Devin Park, who nodded back with the expression of a man who has survived something he will spend a long time processing. Marcus Webb was beside her then. He said quietly, so only she could hear it, Federal prosecutors will want to move quickly. They'll want to use the recordings to pull the full network. That means you're going to be sitting across from some people who are not going to be as reasonable as a federal judge. I know, she said. Celeste. He waited until she looked at him. After everything you built in that company, after today, You don't have to go back in, you know that. She considered this. She thought about the 42nd floor, about the server room, about the encryption architecture she had built over 9 years that had simultaneously made Lucien Dragovich one of the most powerful criminal financiers in the Midwest, and in the version only she had complete access to, the most thoroughly documented. She thought about the second version of the algorithm, the one she had completed in the 6 weeks since the divorce proceedings began, the one that did not exist anywhere in Dragotech's system, the one that was sitting on a second encrypted drive in a safety deposit box on West Jackson Boulevard under a name Lucien had never heard. She thought about this board of directors, who were at this moment either watching the news alerts hitting their phones or were about to be. She thought about 11 minutes in a coffee shop bathroom on a Tuesday in October, and cold water, and a scratched mirror, and the particular clarity that comes after. "I'm going back in," she said. Webb looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. "All right." They walked out of the courtroom into the corridor where the noise of the building, the movement of people, the distant sound of an elevator, the particular hum of institutional fluorescence came back around them like weather. Behind them, through the closed courtroom door, Celeste heard one of the deputies saying something in a low official voice. She didn't catch the words. She didn't try. She had spent 6 weeks building a door. She had just opened it. What she had not told Marcus Webb, what she had not told anyone, was that the server room footage was not the only thing on the drive she had handed to Devon Park that morning. There was a second file, time-stamped 11 days ago, recorded in a different location, in a different building, involving different people. People who were not Barrett Cole, not Raymond Cho, not any of the names that were now sitting in front of federal deputies in a courtroom on South Dearborn. People who, when the federal prosecutors began pulling the thread of Lucien Dragovich's financial infrastructure, were going to present a very significant and very unexpected problem. People who already knew that the divorce had gone wrong. People who were, at this moment, not in Chicago. She pushed through the glass door at the end of the corridor. The October air hit her face, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of the coming rain. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, Chicago area code. She answered it. The voice on the other end said 4 words before the line went dead. "We know about Navarro." The call lasted 4 seconds. Celeste stood on the courthouse steps with the phone still pressed against her ear after the line dropped, listening to the silence that replaced the voice, and did not move. Around her, the morning was doing what October mornings in Chicago do, grinding forward without sentiment, people moving past her on the sidewalk with their collars up and their heads down, a cab accelerating through a yellow light on Dearborn, pigeons relocating from one ledge to another with the bored efficiency of creatures that have survived every version of this city. She lowered the phone, looked at the screen. Unknown number, no callback available. She had expected that. She had not expected the name. Navarro was her maiden name. The name on the shell accounts Raymond Cho had built to frame her. The name that existed in the context of this case in 3 places. The forged financial records, the sealed federal evidence she had submitted this morning, and the knowledge of whoever had constructed the fraud on Lucien's behalf. The people who had just called her were not Lucien. Lucien was in handcuffs 40 feet behind her, being processed by federal deputies. They were not Cole. They were not Cho. They were the part of the network she had documented 11 days ago on a drive that was still in a safety deposit box on West Jackson, the part she had not handed to Marcus Webb because she had not yet decided what handing it to Marcus Webb would cost her. She put the phone in her pocket and went back inside. Webb was in the corridor outside the courtroom, talking to Devon Park in the low, urgent register of attorneys processing the logistics of a morning that had moved faster than anticipated. He looked up when she came back through the glass door, and she watched him register the change in her face. He was good enough to see it, even if he wasn't sure yet what it meant. "What happened?" he said. "I need 5 minutes," she said, "alone." He looked at her for a beat. Then he nodded at Devon, who moved off down the corridor with the practiced discretion of a paralegal who has learned that some conversations are above his clearance level. Webb waited. "Someone called me," she said. 4 seconds. Unknown number. They said 4 words. "We know about Navarro." Webb's expression did not change in the way most people's would. He didn't go pale or sharp-eyed or reach for his phone. He just went very still in the way she had come to recognize, The stillness that meant he was calculating and wanted her to wait while he did it. The name Navarro appears in the sealed federal submission, he said finally. Yes. And in the forged financial records, which are now in federal custody. Yes. Which means whoever called you has access to information from inside either the original fraud operation or the federal submission. Yes. He looked at her. Is there a third option? It wasn't a question. He already suspected there was, and he was giving her the space to confirm it without making her feel cornered, which was one of the things that made Marcus Webb worth what she was paying him. She said, "There's a second drive." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere behind the closed courtroom door, a voice was speaking in an official tone. From the elevator bank at the far end, a bell chimed. "Tell me," he said. She told him. Not everything. The minimum required for him to understand the dimension of the problem. The footage she had captured 11 days ago in the parking structure beneath a restaurant in the West Loop, in which two men whose names appeared nowhere in the Dragotech corporate structure, but whose faces appeared in 3 federal surveillance databases she had accessed via a contact she was not going to name in a courthouse corridor. These 2 men had met with Raymond Cho 4 days before he was supposed to have cut all operational ties with the network Lucian ran beneath the company. The conversation on that footage was not about the divorce. It was about what happened after the divorce. Specifically, it was about what happened if the divorce went wrong. They had a contingency, she said. Lucian had a contingency. Cho was the handoff. If the legal strategy failed and the recordings came out, the network was supposed to activate a secondary protocol. Discredit the recordings. Not legally. They knew they couldn't survive a legal challenge if the footage was genuine. Discredit me. Personally. Completely. Webb was quiet for a moment. How? Navarro, the shell accounts they built to frame me are still active. They have the architecture of financial accounts with real transaction histories built over 8 months. If someone with the right technical access populates those accounts with the right kind of movement, wire transfers, currency exchanges, the kind of pattern that looks like someone running money for a narcotics distribution network, then I don't just lose the civil case, I become a federal target. He absorbed this. The recordings go from being exculpatory to being motive. She wasn't exposing her husband's crimes. She was protecting her own operation by eliminating a partner who was becoming a liability. She said it flatly, the way she had rehearsed it in her head during the 6 weeks she had been building this, because if you say a thing out loud enough, times in a controlled context, you develop the ability to say it in an uncontrolled one without flinching. It's a good frame. I'd have used it. How long have you known about the contingency? 11 days. And you didn't tell me. No. He didn't show anger. She respected that. What he showed was something more precise than anger. The specific expression of a man recalibrating the risk profile of a situation he had believed he understood. If the secondary protocol activates, he said, it activates in the window between now and when the federal investigation gets traction, which is narrow, she said. Days, maybe less. The drive on West Jackson. Yes. We need to move it to federal custody today. If we move it today, the people who just called me know that we've moved it today, because they're monitoring the case and they have someone close enough to know the name Navarro, which means we're telling them that I know about the contingency, which means they accelerate the protocol before we have any protection in place. Webb pressed 2 fingers to his mouth and said nothing for a moment. So we need federal protection first, he said. And to get federal protection fast enough, we need to give the U.S. attorney something that makes them move in hours instead of days. Yes. What's on the second drive that does that? The faces, she said. The 2 men in the parking structure. One of them is named Gregor Vasic. He's a Serbian national with permanent residency in Chicago. He runs a logistics company in Bridgeport that the FBI has had under passive surveillance for 3 years without enough to move on. The second drive gives them enough to move on. Webb looked at her with the careful attention of a man who is revising his understanding of how long something has been in motion. You've been working a federal angle this entire time, he said. I've been making sure I had options, she said. There's a difference. Celeste. His voice was measured, but she could hear the thing underneath it. Not anger, something older and more serious than anger. The tone of a man who has represented people in dangerous situations and understands precisely where the line is between strategic and reckless. If you have evidence relevant to an active FBI surveillance operation and you've been sitting on it, I've been sitting on it for 11 days, she said, while I verified it, while I made sure what I had was real and not a plant. Because the alternative was handing the FBI a drive that turned out to be fabricated by the people I was planning to use it against, which would have ended this morning very differently. He was quiet. I needed today to happen first, she said. I needed Lucian in handcuffs and the federal referral on record before I brought Vasek into it. Because once Vasek is in it, I'm not just a divorce complainant with exculpatory footage anymore. I'm a witness in a federal organized crime investigation, and that changes what protections I'm entitled to. Webb looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked back at her. You've been building a sequence. Yes. Each piece depends on the prior piece being in place. Yes. He let out a breath that was not quite a sigh. And if any single piece had moved wrong, it didn't. Celeste. Marcus. She said it the way he said her name, as a way of recalibrating the focus of what followed. I know what I'm doing. I need you to call your contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office right now and tell them that the witness in the Dragovic referral has additional evidence implicating a subject of an existing FBI surveillance operation, and that the witness requires an emergency briefing with federal protection in place before end of business today. Can you do that? He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Yes, he said. She nodded. Then let's move. They used a conference room on the 6th floor of the courthouse that Webb requisitioned through the clerk's office on the grounds of attorney-client privilege, which bought them 40 minutes of privacy and a phone with a secure line. Webb made 2 calls. The first was to an assistant U.S. attorney named Sandra Osei, whom he had worked with on a fraud case 4 years prior, and who picked up on the second ring in a tone that suggested she had already been briefed on the morning's events in courtroom 14. The second call was to a contact at the field office, whose name Celeste did not catch and whom Webb did not introduce. While he was on the phone, Celeste sat at the conference table and looked at the wall and thought about the 4 words from the unknown number, turning them over in the way you turn over an object to find the weight distribution, looking for what they told her beyond the obvious. We know about Navarro. They hadn't said we're activating the protocol. They hadn't said stop now or we'll destroy you. They had said we know, which was an information declaration, not a threat declaration, which meant they wanted her to know they knew, which meant they wanted her to react. She thought about what reaction they were hoping for. She thought about the gap between what they were hoping for and what she was going to do instead. Webb finished the second call and turned to her. Osei can see us at 2 o'clock. Field office, not the U.S. Attorney's building. She's bringing an FBI liaison. She says if what we have is what it sounds like, they can have a protection detail in place by tonight. She understands about the timing window. I told her days, maybe less. She didn't argue. Good. Celeste stood, picked up her bag. I need to make a call before 2. To who? She considered for a moment whether to answer this and decided that the morning had earned him the full picture. Cho's assistant, she said. Her name is Priya Anand. She's 28 years old. She's been Cho's executive assistant for 3 years, and she does not know what she's been working inside of. I know this because I interviewed her twice, informally, in the months before the divorce proceedings, and she has a specific kind of ignorance. Not the cultivated ignorance of someone who has learned not to ask questions, but genuine ignorance. She thought she worked for a CFO of a cybersecurity firm. And now she knows she doesn't. She's going to know in about 4 hours when the news runs the arrest, and when she realizes it, she is going to go through her files looking for anything that explains what happened, because that is what a person with genuine ignorance does when the thing they didn't know about suddenly becomes visible. And in those files, she may or may not find something that the people who called me this morning do not want found. Webb was very still again. You think Cho kept records that exposed the secondary protocol? I think Cho is a CFO by training and by instinct, and CFOs keep records. I think the reason Vasek met with him 4 days before the divorce hearing cut off was to collect whatever records Cho had been maintaining, and I think Cho did not give them everything because Cho understands that in the kind of organization he's been working inside of, the only thing that keeps you alive after an arrest is leverage. He's protecting himself. He has been protecting himself for months. He agreed to meet with Vasek because refusing was not survivable. He did not give Vasek everything because giving Vasek everything was also not survivable, just on a longer timeline. She paused. Priya Anand has been filing Cho's correspondence for 3 years. If there's a copy of anything he was holding back, it went through her. Webb looked at her for a long moment. You want to get to her before Vasek does. I want to make sure she doesn't get hurt, Celeste said. The rest is a secondary benefit. He nodded slowly. Make the call. I'll get us a car. The call to Priya Anand lasted 6 minutes and took place in the corridor outside the 6th-floor conference room while Webb arranged the transportation. The young woman answered on the 3rd ring in a voice that already had the particular quality of someone who has been staring at news alerts for the past 2 hours and has not yet found a framework for what they're seeing.
Ms. Anand, Celeste said, my name is Celeste Rowan. I was married to Lucian Dragovich. I understand if you don't want to. I know who you are, Priya said. Her voice was tight, not hostile. Tight in the way of someone who is holding something fragile and knows it. I've been watching the news. Then you know Mr. Cho has been arrested. A silence. Then, yes.
I'm not calling to pressure you, and I'm not calling on behalf of the federal investigation. I'm calling because I think you may be in a situation you didn't choose to be in, and I think there may be people who are going to want to talk to you today who are not federal agents. Another silence. Longer. When Priya spoke again, her voice had changed. The tightness had shifted into something closer to fear. The specific fear of someone who has just had a suspicion confirmed that they were hoping would not be confirmed. Someone called the office, she said, an hour ago, before the news broke. They asked for Mr. Cho directly, and when I said he wasn't available, they asked if I was Priya Anand, and they said... She stopped. What did they say? Celeste kept her voice level. They said Mr. Cho had asked them to come by and collect some documents, that it was already arranged. Celeste felt something move through her chest. Not panic, a cold, clean alertness, the kind that comes when a timeline compresses faster than anticipated. Don't let anyone in the office, she said. Don't give documents to anyone. Lock your workstation right now if you haven't already, and then I need you to leave the building and take a cab, not a rideshare, a cab, to the federal courthouse on South Dearborn. Tell the security desk you need to speak to an attorney named Marcus Webb. Can you do that? Yes. Yes, I can. Don't call anyone else first. Don't call Mr. Cho's emergency contact. Don't... There's a folder, Priya said suddenly, as if the decision to say it had been made somewhere below the level of deliberation. In the physical filing system. It's under a client code I don't recognize. He told me it was archived vendor contracts. He told me not to digitize it. It's thick. I filed it 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks ago. 2 weeks before the divorce proceedings entered their final phase. 2 weeks before Raymond Cho would have understood that the outcome was not guaranteed. Leave the folder where it is, Celeste said. Do not move it. Come to the courthouse. She ended the call and stood in the corridor with the phone in her hand and her pulse doing something it had not done all morning, moving faster than she wanted it to, pushing against the discipline she had maintained since 4:45, demanding acknowledgement of the fact that the sequence was accelerating and that she was no longer the only one moving the pieces. Webb appeared at the end of the corridor with his coat on and his briefcase in hand, and he read her face from 30 feet away. What happened? He said. Vasek's people already called Cho's office, she said. They're going for the physical files. He moved faster then. How long does she need to get out? She's leaving now. If they have someone watching the building, then we're already behind, Celeste said, and she said it without inflection because inflection would not make it less true, and she did not have time for anything that did not move her forward. They took the elevator down in silence, and in the silence Celeste stood with her back to the mirrored wall and looked at the floor numbers descending and understood, with the clarity of someone who has spent 6 weeks engineering a controlled demolition and has just felt the first unexpected tremor in the ground, that the part of this she had built was holding. It was the part she hadn't built that was the problem. The lobby of the courthouse was busy in the mid-morning way of federal buildings, people moving with the particular purposeful directionlessness of bureaucratic necessity, security personnel at their stations, the low ambient noise of a system processing itself. Celeste and Webb moved through it toward the main exit, and she was 4 feet from the glass doors when her phone buzzed again. Not a call this time. A text. Unknown number, different from the first. 8 words. Priya Anand just walked out of the building, And then, 3 seconds later, a second message from the same number. She's not going to make it to you. Celeste stopped walking. Webb stopped beside her. She showed him the screen without speaking and watched his face go through the sequence of a man who has just understood that the situation has moved from dangerous to... Celeste was already moving before Webb finished reading the screen. Not running. Running draws attention in a federal courthouse lobby, and attention was the last thing she needed in the next 4 minutes. She moved the way she had learned to move in 9 years of navigating rooms where being watched was the default condition, with purpose, at speed, in a direction that looked deliberate enough that no one would think to question it. Webb was beside her in 2 strides. "Where?" he said. "Cho's office is on Michigan Avenue, 12-minute cab ride. She left on foot first, which means she's either still on Dearborn or she's turned toward the L. If they have someone watching the building, they have someone on the street." "Yes." "Celeste, call Osei," she said. "Tell her we have a potential witness in immediate danger and we need someone on Michigan Avenue now. Don't explain the rest. Just get someone moving." He already had his phone out. She pushed through the glass door into the October air. The street outside the courthouse was the usual mid-morning density. Pedestrians, a food cart, 2 cabs idling at the curb, a city maintenance truck blocking the right lane with its orange cones arranged in a semicircle that nobody was paying attention to. Celeste stood on the top step and scanned in both directions with the same systematic attention she applied to server room layouts and encryption architecture, left to right, near to far, moving objects first, then stationary ones. She saw Priya Anand at the intersection of Dearborn and Jackson, 60 yards south. Small woman, dark coat, moving fast with her head down and her bag clutched against her body with both arms. The specific body language of someone who has just been told something frightening and is trying to put distance between herself and the place she heard it. She also saw the man following her. He was good. He was keeping the right distance, using pedestrian traffic for intermittent cover, not looking directly at his subject. But he was not as good as he thought he was, or he was operating in an environment he assessed as low risk, because he had a tell. Every 12 to 15 steps, he brought his right hand up to his ear in a gesture that looked like adjusting a collar, but was the unconscious movement of someone monitoring an earpiece. Private contractor, not police. Police moved differently, even plainclothes. Celeste went down the courthouse steps at a controlled pace and turned south on Dearborn. She did not have a plan in the architectural sense. She had not built this scenario, had not anticipated this specific configuration of moving pieces in this specific location. What she had instead was the operational habit of 9 years spent managing systems in motion, the instinct for identifying the single variable in a dynamic situation that, if you alter it, changes the outcome of everything downstream. The variable here was the distance between Priya Anand and the man with the earpiece. She closed it. She moved up the sidewalk at a pace that was slightly faster than the pedestrian flow without being fast enough to register as urgent. And at the corner of Jackson, she came up alongside Priya from the left, close enough that their arms almost touched, and said quietly without looking at her, "Don't stop walking. Don't look at me. I'm Celeste Rowan. There's a man behind you, navy coat, gray scarf, 20 yards back. Keep moving south." Priya made a sound that was not quite a word, but she kept walking. "The cab stand at the metro station is 2 blocks ahead," Celeste said. "We're going to take a cab to the federal building on Adams, not the courthouse we came from, the federal building. Can you hear me?" "Yes," Priya said. Her voice was doing something difficult, trying to stay controlled while her body was insisting on a different response. Celeste could hear the effort of it, the way she was pulling each word up from underneath the fear and making it functional. "You said there was a folder," Celeste said. "Physical files. Did you have access to it this morning before you left?" A beat. Then, "I took it." Celeste's stride almost broke. Almost. "You took it. I didn't know why. When you said don't move it, something in me, I took it. It's in my bag." Celeste processed this in the 3 seconds it took to cross a crack in the sidewalk and navigate around a woman with a stroller. The folder was not in Cho's office. It was in the bag of a 28-year-old woman with no operational experience walking 60 feet ahead of a man with an earpiece on a public street in downtown Chicago. "Okay," she said. "That's okay. Keep it closed. Don't open it." The cab stand appeared at the end of the next block. 2 cabs, one occupied, one with its light on. They were 15 feet from it when the man with the earpiece increased his pace. Celeste felt it before she saw it. The shift in the pedestrian acoustics behind her, the change in the rhythm of footsteps that means someone has made a decision. She turned her head just enough to confirm it and then said to Priya, flat and without emphasis, "Get in the cab. Right now. Go." Priya went. The cab door opened and closed, and Celeste turned fully around on the sidewalk and looked directly at the man with the earpiece, who stopped. He was mid-40s, built like someone who had once been in a military context and had maintained a version of that conditioning into a civilian life that involved physical work. His face was careful, not blank, careful, the face of someone trained to give away the minimum, and his right hand was at his side with his fingers slightly open, which was not a threatening posture but was a posture that kept options available. They stood 4 feet apart on a sidewalk in downtown Chicago, with people moving around them in both directions. "You're going to miss your cab," he said. His voice was flat and accented with something Eastern European that sat underneath the English like a watermark. "I have another one," Celeste said. He looked at her with the particular attention of someone reassessing a variable that came in differently than expected. She watched him run the calculation. The witness was already in the cab. The cab was pulling away from the curb. The woman standing in front of him was not the target, but was clearly the reason the target had moved faster than anticipated. He made the choice she had thought he would make. He looked past her at the departing cab, then looked back at her and said, "Mr. Vasic would like to speak with you." "I'm sure he would," she said. "Tell him to call my attorney." She turned and walked to the second cab, got in, and gave the driver the address of the federal building on Adams Street. Her hands, in her lap, were not entirely steady. She pressed them flat against her thighs and watched the city move past the window and breathed. The federal building was 11 minutes away. The cab made it in 8 because the driver took the Congress Parkway and hit the lights right. Celeste spent those 8 minutes watching the rear window and not seeing the navy coat, which meant either the man had a car she wasn't identifying, or he had made the calculation that following 2 women into a federal building was a category of visible action he wasn't authorized to take. Either way, he had her face now. He had confirmed she was connected to Priya Anand. He would report this, and someone above him would make a different calculation, at a different time, in a different location. She knew this. She filed it in the part of her mind that kept the running inventory of costs and moved forward. Priya was waiting in the lobby of the federal building when Celeste arrived, standing near the security desk with her bag held in front of her with both hands like something she was afraid to set down. She looked younger than 28. She looked like someone who had gotten on a train that morning thinking she knew where it was going. Celeste showed her federal building ID to the desk officer. She had applied for it 3 weeks ago, on the same day she had first contacted Marcus Webb about the second drive, on the grounds that the Dragovich matter was likely to require repeated federal facility access. She had been correct. She brought Priya to a waiting area on the second floor, away from the main corridor, and they sat across from each other in chairs that were the specific shade of institutional blue that exists only in government buildings, and Celeste looked at the young woman and said, "Are you all right?" Priya made a sound that was half a laugh and not funny at all. "No." "Okay." Celeste nodded. "That's honest. Can you tell me about the folder?" Priya set her bag on the seat beside her. She reached in and removed a manila folder that was thick enough to require 2 hands, fastened with a binder clip rather than a string, and held it out towards Celeste with the expression of someone passing off something they are relieved to no longer be holding. Celeste took it. She did not open it immediately. "How long has this been in the filing system?" 8 weeks, like I said. "Did Cho say anything when he gave it to you? Any instruction beyond don't digitize it?" Priya thought about this. "He said if anyone asked about it, it was archived vendor contracts. And he said..." She stopped. "What?" "He said if anything happened to him, I should make sure it got to the right people." She paused on that. "I didn't know what he meant. I thought maybe he was worried about the company's legal exposure. I didn't know..." "You didn't know what he was inside of," Celeste said. "No." "And now you do." Priya looked at her hands. "I filed his correspondence for 3 years. I scheduled his meetings. I ordered his lunch." She said these things like she was counting them, like the accumulation of them was supposed to add up to something comprehensible. He said good morning every day. He remembered my mother was sick. He asked about her. Celeste watched her work through it and did not try to shortcut the process, because the process was real, and shortcutting it would have been dishonest, and she had spent 9 years inside a dishonest architecture and was finished with it. People are complicated, Celeste said. That's not an excuse. It's just the accurate version of what you're carrying. Priya looked up. Her eyes were dry, which Celeste recognized as the particular containment of someone who has decided they are going to hold it together until they are somewhere private, and is expending considerable energy on the maintenance of that decision. "What's in the folder?" Priya asked. "I don't know yet." "Open it." Celeste opened it. The first 6 pages were financial records. Account statements, wire transfer confirmations, routing numbers. Her eyes moved through them with the practiced speed of someone who had spent 9 years reading financial architecture, and in the first 90 seconds she identified 3 accounts she recognized, and 4 she did not. The 3 she recognized were the shell accounts built under the name Navarro, the Cho-constructed frame that the fraud had used to make her appear to be moving money. The 4 she did not recognize were doing something different. They were not constructed to look like her. They were constructed to receive. She turned to the next section. It was a printed email chain, 12 messages, the most recent dated 6 weeks ago. The sender address was a Proton Mail account with a username that meant nothing on its own. The recipient was a different Proton Mail account, but the content was not encrypted. Cho had printed the decrypted version, which meant at some point he had access to both keys. She read the first 3 messages and felt the ground shift, not the controlled, anticipated shift of a sequence executing correctly. The other kind. The kind that happens when a variable you did not account for turns out to have been load-bearing. She read the messages again, slowly, making sure. The messages were communications between Raymond Cho and a person identified in the thread only as M. In the messages, Cho reported on the progress of the divorce proceedings with a level of detail that matched what he would have had access to as CFO. He reported on Lucien's legal strategy. He reported on the psychiatric evaluation, the forged financial records, the witness payments. He also reported on Celeste's response strategy, her attorney contacts, her financial moves, the early indications that she was building a counter case. In the 5th message, dated 9 weeks ago, M had asked a specific question. Has she accessed the server room in the past 30 days? Cho had answered, yes, twice. I don't know what she was pulling. M had responded, find out. If she has recordings, we need to know before the hearing. Celeste turned to the next page. Her hands were still now, which was not calm, but its precise opposite. The stillness of a system that has received input it does not yet know how to process. The 8th message contained a name, Marcus Webb. The message read, Webb is clean on the surface, but he was referred to her by DC contact. Confirm the referral chain before we move forward. She read it 3 times. She turned to the 10th message, dated 5 weeks ago. Webb's referral came through Harmon at the appellate level. Harmon is ours. Webb doesn't know it, but his access to Rowan came through a channel we control. If the recordings surface, we have a secondary option. Webb's referral origin can be surfaced to create the impression of coordination, enough to compromise the admissibility argument. She sat with this for 11 seconds. 11 pound. Priya was watching her face with the wary attention of someone who has learned in the past 2 hours that other people's expressions contain information she needs. What is it? Priya said. Celeste did not answer immediately. She was doing the thing she had trained herself to do in the moments when a system reveals a flaw you did not design. Not reacting, not yet, but mapping. Finding the boundaries of the damage, identifying what held and what did not. What had held, the recordings, the federal referral, the freeze on the assets, Lucien in custody. All of that was real and procedurally on record and could not be walked back by a compromised referral chain. What had not held, the belief that she had controlled the information environment completely. Someone identified only as M had been monitoring her counter strategy in real time for at least 9 weeks. Someone had known she was building a case. Someone had let her build it, had watched her build it, had allowed today to happen, and had a secondary option waiting that could compromise Webb's standing as her counsel at the moment when she most needed his standing to be unimpeachable. She thought about Webb, right now, making calls on her behalf to Sandra Osei at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Calls made in good faith by a man who did not know that the chain of people who had connected him to Celeste Rowan included at least one person who reported to M. She thought about the federal investigation that was now in motion. The investigation that was going to pull on the thread of Lucien Dragovic's financial network and find Gregor Vasek and find the secondary protocol and find, if M chose to surface it at the right moment, the referral chain that compromised her own attorney. She thought about the message from the unknown number that morning. We know about Navarro. It had not been a threat. It had been a signal, a demonstration of access, a way of telling her, before the morning even ended, that the game she thought she had finished was still in progress, and that the person playing against her had been in the room the entire time. She closed the folder. I need to make a call, she said. By myself. Priya looked at her. Is it bad? Celeste stood and picked up the folder and her bag and looked at the young woman who had filed correspondence for 3 years without knowing what she was filing and thought about what the accurate answer to that question was. It's manageable, she said, because that was what she needed it to be. And because the distance between what you need a thing to be and what it actually is has to be closed by action rather than assessment. And she was already building the action in the part of her mind that had not stopped running calculations since 4:45 that morning. She walked to the far end of the waiting area, turned her back to the room, and dialed a number she had memorized 3 weeks ago and had hoped she would not need. It rang twice. A man answered. Not Webb. Not anyone Webb knew about. It's Rowan, she said. I need the identity behind a Proton Mail account. I have a username. I need a name and a location, and I need it before 2 o'clock. A pause, then, that's a short window. I know. It's going to cost more than we discussed. I know that too, she said. And then, because the accuracy of the situation required it, there may also be a problem with Webb. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds and felt much longer. How bad? The man said. Celeste looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, gray and dense under the October cloud cover, the buildings standing in their columns of steel and glass like the architecture of a system that looked permanent until you understood which. The man on the phone was named Darius Fell. He was 43 years old, operated out of a server facility in Evanston under the cover of a legitimate network security consultancy, and had worked for Celeste in an unofficial capacity for 14 months. Since the period, 8 months before she filed for divorce, when she had understood that the thing she was building required tools that existed outside the boundaries of what Marcus Webb could provide or sanction. She had found him the way she found most things, by understanding the architecture of the system she needed to penetrate and identifying the specific type of person who would have built the back door. Darius Fell had spent 6 years at the NSA before a disagreement with his supervisors over the ethical boundaries of domestic surveillance had resulted in a separation that was technically voluntary and practically anything but. He was precise, expensive, and had a personal distaste for organized crime that he never explained and she had never asked about. She had paid him in untraceable increments from an account that predated her marriage and that Lucien's financial team had never found because it was registered under a name that was neither Rowan nor Navarro, but a third name, a family name from her mother's side, that existed in no document she had ever filed under either of the other two. How bad? Darius said again. The referral chain to Webb includes someone named Harmon at the appellate level, she said. The message identifies Harmon as theirs. Webb doesn't know. A beat. She could hear Darius breathing, which was unusual. He was normally still enough on the phone that she sometimes checked to confirm the call hadn't dropped. Harmon, he said. As in Judge Clifton Harmon. The name landed in her chest like cold water. You know him. He's been on my list for 8 months. I couldn't tie him to anything clean enough to be useful. He sits on the 7th Circuit. He has no visible connection to Dragovic's corporate structure and a very carefully maintained public profile as an anti-corruption advocate. The particular species of nausea that Celeste had trained herself not to feel moved through her anyway, briefly, and she pressed it down. A federal appellate judge, not a bot psychiatrist, not a contracted CFO, not a criminal network lieutenant. A federal appellate judge, embedded in the referral chain that had brought her to her own attorney, positioned to surface a compromise at the precise moment it would do the most damage. If they surface the Harmon connection during the federal investigation, she said, Webb's access to me gets characterized as coordinated. The recordings become tainted by association. Worse than that, Darius said. If Harmon files a referral challenge at the appellate level, it can trigger an automatic stay on the asset freeze pending review. Lucien's legal team files for emergency release pending the stay. He's out in 72 hours. She stood at the window of the federal building waiting area and looked at the city and did the math on 72 hours and what Vasek's network could accomplish in 72 hours with Lucien available to authorize movement. The Proton Mail account, she said. I need the identity. I heard you the first time. Keys, faintly, in the background. Give me the username. She gave it to him. More keys. A pause that lasted long enough that she turned from the window and looked back at Priya Anand, who was sitting in the institutional blue chair with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, doing the specific internal work of a person reorganizing their understanding of the past 3 years. Celeste, Darius said. The way he said her name, the weight of it, the particular quality of someone who has found a thing and is deciding how to deliver it, told her before the words did. Tell me, she said. The account was created 14 months ago from an IP address that traces through 3 VPN layers to a terminal in the Dragotech Tower, he said, 42nd floor. That's Cho's floor. It's also the floor that houses the executive suite, Darius said. The account wasn't created by Cho. The creation metadata points to a device registered to the building's internal network under an access credential issued to the Office of the Executive Director of Legal Affairs. Celeste said nothing. Her name is Diana Voss, Darius said. She's been Dragotech's head of legal for 6 years. And before you ask, yes, Franklin Voss, the psychiatrist who provided the fabricated diagnosis, is her brother. The waiting area was quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closed. A phone rang twice at a desk she couldn't see and stopped. Diana Voss. 6 years at Dragotech. Every legal filing, every compliance document, every contract and corporate communication for 6 years had passed through Diana Voss's office. She had been present at every board meeting Celeste had attended. She had sat across conference tables from Celeste more times than Celeste could count, in the particular posture of corporate legal counsel, careful, neutral, professionally uninflected. She had also, it now appeared, been the operational architect of the conspiracy that had attempted to destroy Celeste's life. The identity behind M, the person who had coordinated the psychiatric fraud through her own brother, embedded the Harmon connection into the referral chain and spent 9 weeks monitoring Celeste's counter-strategy through Raymond Cho. She's still in the building, Celeste said. It was not a question. Dragotech's assets were frozen, but a freeze order applied to financial instruments, not personnel. Unless Diana Voss had been named in the federal referral, and she had not, because Celeste had not known her name until 40 seconds ago, she had no legal obligation to be anywhere other than her office. As of 20 minutes ago, her badge logged into the 42nd floor, Darius confirmed. She knows the freeze is in place. She knows Lucien and Cho are in custody. She's in her office. Cleaning it, Darius said. That would be my read. Celeste turned from the window. She was already in motion toward the waiting area where Priya sat, her bag on her shoulder, the folder under her arm, her body ahead of the decision by the fraction of a second that instinct requires. I need one more thing, she said into the phone. The secondary protocol, the mechanism for populating the Navarro accounts with the narcotics distribution pattern. Is it automated or does it require manual activation? Manual, Darius said immediately. Something like that needs a human sign-off. Too much legal exposure if it fires automatically at the wrong moment. Who has authorization to activate it? A pause. Given what you just told me about Voss, probably her. Then I have a window, Celeste said. She hasn't activated it yet, or we'd already be seeing movement in the accounts. She's waiting for something. Confirmation that the Cho folder didn't make it out of the building, Darius said, and Celeste heard in his voice the same cold clarity she felt in her own chest. She sent Vasek's man to collect the folder. He reported back that the folder was gone and that you were in possession of Priya Anand. She doesn't know what's in it yet. She's waiting to find out if she needs to activate before she goes. If I walk into that building right now, She activates the moment she sees you on the building cameras. You won't make it to 42. Celeste stopped walking. She was in the center of the waiting area, 3 feet from Priya, who had looked up and was watching her with the focused attention of someone who has decided to be useful if given the chance. She ran the sequence in her head. Diana Voss in her office, cleaning files, waiting for confirmation. Vasik's man who had her face now and had reported back. The window between Voss deciding she had waited long enough and Voss activating the protocol and walking out of the building into a city where a federal asset freeze did not constitute an arrest warrant. She looked at Priya. "Can you access Dragotech's internal communication system from outside the building?" she said. Priya blinked. "My credentials aren't revoked yet. The freeze was announced 40 minutes ago. IT compliance takes at least 2 hours to process credential revocations after a freeze order. It's in the protocol manual. I helped write the section." Celeste looked at her for 1 full second. "I need you to send a message from Cho's internal account to Diana Voss's internal account. Right now. From your phone." "Cho's account? I don't have his credentials." "You have administrative override access. Every executive assistant at Dragotech has override access to their principal's communication accounts for coverage purposes. I built that into the system architecture 4 years ago." She watched Priya's face process this. "Use it." "What do I write?" "Write, folder is contained. Do not activate. Waiting for instruction." She said it once, evenly, without repeating it. Priya already had her phone out. Her hands were moving. She was fast. 3 years of executive correspondence had made her fast. And she navigated the internal system with the muscle memory of someone who had done it 1,000 times in low-stakes conditions and was now doing it in the only condition that mattered. "Sent," Priya said. 12 seconds. Possibly the most important 12 seconds of either of their mornings. "Now give me your building access badge," Celeste said. Priya looked up. "My badge gets me to the lobby and the 38th floor, not 42. "The 38th floor houses the secondary server room," Celeste said, "the one that runs the backup communication infrastructure for the executive suite. If the primary system on 42 goes into lockdown, the executive terminals reroute through 38. She held out her hand. "Give me the badge." Priya unclipped it from her bag strap and handed it over. Her hand was steady. Celeste registered this and said nothing about it because noting it would have made it into a bigger thing than Priya needed it to be right now. "Stay here," Celeste said. "Do not leave this building. When Webb arrives, and he will arrive, he's been trying to call me for the past 10 minutes. Tell him everything you told me. Show him the folder. Tell him Diana Voss. Tell him Harmon. Tell him I'm in the building." "Which building?" "He'll know." She was out of the waiting area before Priya could say anything else, moving down the corridor toward the elevator bank with the folder under her arm and Webb's 11 missed calls on a phone she had silenced 40 minutes ago, and a plan that was not a plan in the architectural sense, but was the only available configuration of what she had and where she needed to be. The cab to Michigan Avenue took 9 minutes. The driver tried to make conversation about the weather, and she answered in monosyllables that communicated, without hostility, the conversation was not available. She spent the 9 minutes reading the remaining pages of the Cho folder against her knee, the cab's motion making the pages shift, and found 3 more things she needed and 1 thing she hadn't expected. The thing she hadn't expected was a handwritten note on the last page, in Cho's cramped, leftward slanting handwriting addressed to no one, which read, "I did not know about the wife until it was already in motion. For what it's worth." She folded that page separately and put it in her jacket pocket and did not think about what it was worth until she had time to think about things that were not immediately operational. The Dragotech Tower on Michigan Avenue had 6 entrance points. Celeste knew all of them because she had designed the security architecture for the building 4 years ago. And designing security architecture for a building means understanding every point of ingress with the same attention you give to the points you are trying to protect. The main lobby entrance was monitored by 4 cameras and 2 security personnel, both of whom would have her face flagged in the system by now. The parking structure entrance on the east side required a vehicle credential. The service entrance on the north side of the building operated on a card reader system that ran on the same credential infrastructure as the employee badges. She used the service entrance. Priya's badge got her through the first door. The second door, the one that led from the service corridor to the elevator lobby, was on a separate system that required either a service credential or an executive override. Celeste stood in front of the panel for 4 seconds, then entered a 12-digit code from memory. A maintenance override she had built into the system herself. In the same session in which she had built the acoustic properties of the server room alcove, on the same operational principle, you design the lock, you keep a key. The elevator to 38 took 90 seconds that felt like considerably more. The 38th floor was quieter than it should have been for 10:30 on a Thursday morning, which told her the freeze announcement had already moved through the building population in the particular way that institutional fear moves, faster than official communication, leaving behind it the specific silence of people who have gone still, because they don't yet know if movement will make things better or worse. She found the secondary server room at the end of the east corridor, behind a door that required her badge and her palm print, the latter of which was still in the system because removing a former executive's biometric credentials from a federal contractor's security infrastructure requires a compliance process that takes longer than a morning. Inside, the room was cool and humming and smelled of conditioned air and the particular electrical scent of machines running at high capacity. The terminals along the north wall were active. She sat at the second one, pulled the keyboard toward her, and entered her administrator credentials, the ones that technically should have been revoked in the divorce settlement, but that the IT compliance team had not yet actioned because IT compliance at Dragotech ran on the same 2-hour lag that Priya had cited. The executive communication system came up. She navigated to the backup infrastructure layer that routed traffic from the 42nd floor terminals during lockdown conditions. Diana Voss had not responded to the message from Cho's account, but the system showed her terminal as active. She was reading, not responding, which meant she was processing the message but not yet convinced. Celeste opened a new message in the system, routing it through the 42nd floor infrastructure as a relay, and addressed it to Gregor Vasik's registered Dragotech vendor account, the logistics company in Bridgeport that appeared in the corporate system as a contracted IT services provider. She wrote, "Protocol suspended. Rowan has contacted federal prosecutors directly. Activation now creates evidence of coordination. Stand down and await instruction." She signed it with Diana Voss's internal signature block, which was stored in the communication system's template library. She sent it. Then she opened the system's audit log, navigated to Diana Voss's terminal activity for the past 4 hours, and began downloading the complete record to an encrypted portable partition she had built into the fold of the Cho folder's cardboard backing 3 weeks ago. On the day she had understood she would eventually need a way to carry evidence out of a building that might be watching her walk out of it. The download took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. She watched the progress bar with the focused attention of someone who has run out of room for anything other than the immediate variable. At 3 minutes 40 seconds, the door at the far end of the corridor opened. She did not turn around immediately. She finished watching the download bar. At 4 minutes 8 seconds, it completed. She ejected the partition, closed the terminal session, and turned around. Diana Voss was standing in the doorway of the server room. She was 51 years old, tall, with the particular posture of someone who had spent 3 decades in rooms where posture communicated authority. She was wearing a coat, which meant she had been on her way out. In her right hand, she was holding a phone, and the expression on her face was the expression of someone who has just walked into a room to find a variable they had assessed as neutralized. They looked at each other across 12 feet of conditioned server room air. "You built a message from Cho's account," Diana said. Her voice was controlled, not surprised. She had processed surprise already, somewhere between the doorway and now. What remained was the working version of the woman, the one that operated after the human responses had been managed. "You don't have his credentials." "Administrative override," Celeste said. "I built it into the system." Diana absorbed this with the specific expression of someone revising a risk assessment in real time. "The folder." "Federal custody," Celeste said, "along with your Proton mail correspondence with Cho, along with the Harmon referral chain." Something moved in Diana's face. Not fear exactly. Something older and more specific than fear, the expression of someone who has spent considerable effort constructing a structure and has just heard the sound of its load-bearing element giving way. "You were supposed to be gone," Diana said, and the flatness of it, the absence of theatrical menace, was somehow more disturbing than anger would have been. "He was supposed to have ended this cleanly. You were supposed to walk out of that courtroom with nothing and disappear." "I know," Celeste said. "That's why I didn't."
Diana looked at her for a long moment. Then her thumb moved on her phone. Celeste said, I already sent the stand-down message to Vasek. Whatever you're trying to reach him for, he's not going to move until he hears from you directly. And if you call him from inside this building in the next 2 minutes, that call gets logged in a system that is currently being mirrored in real time to a federal evidence partition. Diana's thumb stopped. The Navarro accounts, Celeste said. The secondary protocol. If you activate it from anywhere in the next 4 hours, the activation metadata traces to you directly, because Cho's records document that you are the sole authorization holder. You activate it. You hand the federal prosecutors a conspiracy charge with your name as the principal architect. You walk out of this building right now, you have a window. Not a wide one, but a window. Diana looked at her with an expression that Celeste could not fully categorize. It was too layered, too much the product of a specific kind of intelligence that had spent decades in the service of a specific kind of wrong, and was now performing in real time the calculation of a woman who understands that the exit she planned is no longer the exit available to her. What do you want? Diana said. Celeste reached into the fold of the Cho folder and removed the encrypted partition. She held it up so Diana could see it clearly. I want you to call Judge Harmon, she said, right now. From your phone, in this room, where the building system logs the call, I want you to tell him that the referral chain compromise is documented and that attempting to surface it will result in the immediate submission of this partition to the FBI field office on Roosevelt Road. I want you to tell him that his window for a voluntary disclosure agreement closes at noon today and that the U.S. Attorney's Office already has a contact waiting for his call. She paused. And then I want you to sit down and wait for Marcus Webb to arrive with federal agents, and I want you to tell them everything. Diana stood in the doorway for a long moment. The phone in her hand was very still. Everything, she repeated. Everything, Celeste said, including the things Lucien doesn't know you know. Because I've been reading Cho's correspondence for the past 20 minutes, and there are things in there that didn't come from Lucien's operation, things that came from yours. And if you want the distinction between architect and instrument to matter to a federal prosecutor, you need to be the one who surfaces them first. The server room hummed around them. Somewhere in the building, a door closed on a floor above them. The sound came through the ceiling in a way that made the space feel smaller than it was. Diana Voss looked at the woman she had spent 9 weeks monitoring, framing, and attempting to neutralize, and something crossed her face that was not admiration and not defeat, but the compound expression of someone encountering a calculation they recognize as having been executed better than their own. She walked to the terminal beside Celeste, sat down, and began to dial. And in the moment before the call connected, in the 2 seconds of silence between Diana's thumb pressing the call button and the first ring reaching Judge Clifton Harmon's phone, Celeste stood in the humming cold of the server room on the 38th floor of the building she had built, and felt the last piece of the sequence she had not designed click into the place it needed to occupy, and understood that the distance between what remained and what was finished was exactly 1. The call lasted 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Celeste stood 3 feet away from Diana Voss and listened to one side of a conversation that dismantled a federal judge's career in the same measured, procedural tone that Diana had used for 6 years to draft contracts and compliance documents and the legal architecture of a conspiracy that had nearly worked. Harmon tried to speak 4 times in the first 2 minutes. Diana spoke over him twice and through him twice, and each time she did it with the particular authority of someone who is no longer managing a relationship but closing one. At the 4-minute mark, Harmon stopped trying to argue and started asking about immunity. Diana looked at Celeste when he asked it. Celeste gave her a single nod. The U.S. Attorney's Office has a contact waiting, Diana said into the phone. You call before noon, you disclose everything, you don't negotiate the scope of disclosure, you disclose everything. And you have a window for a cooperation agreement. You wait past noon, the partition goes to the field office, and you have no window at all. She paused. Clifton, I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling to tell you that the math has changed, and this is the only version of the math where you come out with anything left. Do with that what you want. She ended the call. The server room hummed around them. Celeste looked at Diana Voss, who was sitting at the terminal with the phone in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance,
in the posture of someone who has just completed an action that cannot be uncompleted and is now in the first seconds of understanding what that means for the rest of what comes. "He'll call," Diana said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, tutas," Celeste said. "He'll call." Diana set the phone on the desk beside the terminal. She looked at her own hands for a moment, and then she looked up at Celeste with an expression that was not quite what Celeste had expected. Not the contained professional neutrality she had maintained across conference tables for 6 years, and not the cold operational precision she had heard in the Proton Mail correspondence. It was something older and more unguarded than either of those. The expression that lives underneath the constructed versions of a person and rarely surfaces except in the moments when the constructed versions have become too expensive to maintain. "How long did you know it was me?" Diana said. "An hour," Celeste said. "I suspected someone in the legal structure for longer. I didn't have your name until this morning. But you had the contingency." "I had a contingency for the contingency," Celeste said. "I didn't know what shape it would take." Diana looked at her. "You were ready to burn Webb to protect the recordings. I was ready to find another way to protect the recordings if Webb was compromised. There's a difference." "Not much of one. Enough of one," Celeste said, and she said it without heat, because it was true and because she had made peace with the precise nature of the difference in the cab ride over, in the same way she had made peace with the 11 minutes in the coffee shop bathroom and the cheap cotton sheets and the $14 drip machine. You make the choices the situation requires, and you carry the weight of them accurately, and you don't dress the weight up as something lighter than it is. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He wasn't always what he became. Lucien." "In the beginning, I know," Celeste said. "I built the legal architecture for the corporate side because I believed in the technology. I believed in what you were building." She said it without apparent expectation that it would change anything, which Celeste respected. The other part came in increments, the way things like that always come in. "Yes," Celeste said. "By the time I understood the full scope of what I was inside of, I had enough exposure to make leaving more dangerous than staying." "I know that too." Diana looked at her directly. "Does it matter to you? Any of it?" Celeste thought about Raymond Cho's handwritten note folded in her jacket pocket. "I did not know about the wife until it was already in motion. For what it's worth." She thought about what it was worth, which was not absolution and not excuse and was also not nothing. "It matters to the sentencing guidelines," she said, "and it matters to the truth, which is the only place it can matter right now." Diana absorbed this. Then she nodded, once, and turned back to the terminal and folded her hands in her lap to wait. Marcus Webb arrived on the 38th floor 22 minutes later with Sandra Osei from the U.S. Attorney's Office and 2 agents from the FBI field office, whose names Celeste would not learn until the following week, when they appeared on the federal witness documentation she was asked to review and sign. Webb came through the server room door first, and the look he gave Celeste when he saw her standing in the corner of the room next to a seated Diana Voss was the look of a man who has been revising his understanding of a situation for the past 40 minutes and has arrived at a revision he did not anticipate and is not fully sure how to feel about. She had texted him from the cab. 3 sentences. "Diana Voss is M. Harmon is theirs, but will cooperate. Meet me at the building." He had not responded to the text. He had just come. She gave him the encrypted partition and the Cho folder and told him about Harmon's call in the corridor outside the server room, while Osei and the agents handled Diana Voss with the procedural efficiency of people who have been briefed on the situation and understand its dimensions. Webb listened without interrupting, which was one of his disciplines. And when she finished, he stood in the corridor with the partition in one hand and the folder in the other, and looked at her with the expression she had come to associate with his recalibrations. "The Harmon piece," he said. "You knew my referral chain was potentially compromised before you told me." "I suspected it for 3 weeks," she said. "I confirmed it this morning. And you didn't tell me." "No." He was quiet for a moment, not angry in the way that shuts down, angry in the way that is working through something honestly. "Because telling me would have changed how I operated, and you needed me operating without knowing." "Yes, that's a significant thing to have decided about someone who is working on your behalf." "I know," she said. "I'm telling you now." He looked at the partition. He looked at the folder. He looked at her with the full weight of 61 years of practice in the particular field of human beings doing things to each other and needing someone to help them navigate the consequences. "Did you ever consider," he said, "that there might have been a way to do this that involved trusting people more?" She thought about this honestly, the way the question deserved. "I considered it," she said. "I decided that the cost of being wrong about who to trust was higher than the cost of carrying it alone." And now, looking at where we're standing, she looked down the corridor at the server room door, through which she could hear the low professional voices of federal agents doing the work of documenting the end of something. She thought about the 4:45 alarm that had not been an alarm, the water stain on the ceiling, the $14 coffee machine, the 11 minutes. "I'd do the same," she said. "I'd carry it the same way, but I'd tell you sooner at the end." Webb looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but the movement of a man who has found, somewhere in the rubric of a very complicated morning, a thing he can respect without fully approving of. "All right," he said. "Let's go finish it." What followed was not fast. The machinery of federal justice moves with a particular rhythm that has nothing to do with the urgency of the human situations it processes, and Celeste spent the remainder of that Thursday and the entirety of the following 9 days in the specific purgatory of depositions, evidence reviews, witness interviews, and the procedural documentation of a case that had grown from its origins in a divorce court on South Dearborn into a federal organized crime investigation spanning 4 states and 3 international jurisdictions. She gave her testimony in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's Office with Sandra Osei across the table and a court reporter in the corner, and she gave it in the same tone she had used in the server room and the courthouse corridor and the cab rides in between: level, specific, without performance. She answered every question completely. She did not minimize her own actions or construct a version of the events that made her look cleaner than she was. She had built systems outside of what her attorney knew about. She had maintained contacts she had not disclosed. She had made decisions in the interest of the outcome that she could justify, but that were not without cost. Osei, to her credit, did not flinch at any of it. She was the kind of federal prosecutor who valued accuracy over narrative, which made her, in Celeste's experience, rarer and more useful than the kind who valued narrative over accuracy. Clifton Harmon called the U.S. Attorney's Office at 11:47, 13 minutes before the noon deadline. His cooperation agreement was finalized within 36 hours. He disclosed 18 months of coordination with Diana Voss's network, 3 other judicial referrals that were being investigated by the time Celeste read about it in the documentation, and the complete chain of communication between his office and Vasek's logistics operation in Bridgeport. He resigned from the 7th Circuit bench on a Tuesday morning, and the announcement ran in the Tribune beneath the fold, which Celeste read in a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue and then set down and did not read again. Gregor Vasek was arrested at O'Hare International on a Thursday morning, 11 days after Lucian's arrest, attempting to board a flight to Belgrade with a carry-on bag that contained 3 encrypted drives and a Serbian passport and a name that was not Vasek. The FBI had been at the gate before his boarding group was called, which meant Darius Fell had done something with the stand-down message that Celeste had not specifically asked him to do, but did not find herself regretting. Raymond Cho entered a cooperation agreement in the 2nd week and testified for 14 hours over 3 days. The handwritten note in the Cho folder was entered into evidence, and Osei used it in the sentencing memorandum to distinguish Cho's role from Diana Voss's in the way that Celeste had suggested was the only place the distinction could matter. It did not spare him. It did not spare anyone. But it made the record accurate, and accuracy was, at this point, the only standard Celeste was still interested in holding things to. Diana Voss did not request leniency in her cooperation agreement. She requested only that the record reflect the sequence of how she had entered the conspiracy and how she had exited it, and Osei honored the request. Whether this made any difference in how Diana Voss experienced the years that followed was not something Celeste knew or attempted to know. The Dragotech board convened 3 weeks after the federal arraignment. Celeste arrived at the 42nd floor in an ivory suit that she had purchased with money from the account under her mother's family name, and she walked off the elevator into a boardroom she had last entered 14 months ago as a spouse being systematically written out of the company she had built. The 8 remaining board members, 4 of the original 12, having been removed due to their proximity to Lucien's corporate fraud, were seated when she arrived, and they had the collective expression of people who have been through something and are waiting to find out whether what comes next is better or worse. She put the new algorithm on the table, not literally. She put a printed technical summary of it on the table, because the algorithm itself existed in a single encrypted instance on a drive in a safety deposit box on West Jackson, and it was going to stay there until the terms were settled. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes. She explained what the original algorithm had done, in terms that the non-technical board members could follow. She explained what the new version did in the same terms. She explained the market position this gave the company if they moved immediately, and the market position it gave their largest competitor if the company declined to move. Then she gave them the choice, the same one she had been building toward for 6 weeks before she even knew Diana Voss's name. She did not frame it as a threat. She did not frame it as a negotiation. She framed it as a decision, which was what it was. And she waited while the board members looked at each other in the way boards look at each other when they already know what the decision is and are performing the deliberation for the record. The vote took 9 minutes, unanimous. She became CEO of Dragotech at 3:17 on a Thursday afternoon, 7 weeks after she had walked out of that building with a flash drive in her attorney's hand and nothing else. The next 6 months were not triumphant in the way the outside version of the story made them look. Rebuilding a company that has been built on the infrastructure of fear is not a clean or fast or emotionally uncomplicated process, and Celeste did not pretend it was. She fired 11 people in the first 30 days, not because she wanted to, but because the architecture of the organization they had maintained could not be retained without retaining what it had been built to protect. She hired 34 people in the same period, looking for a specific quality that she could identify but not fully articulate. Something in the way they answered questions that told her whether they were accustomed to saying what they believed or accustomed to calculating what the room wanted to hear. She promoted Priya Anand to Director of Executive Operations in the 2nd month. Priya accepted with the particular composure of someone who had decided, somewhere in the institutional blue waiting room of a federal building on a Thursday morning, that the version of herself that had filed correspondence without looking at it too closely was not the version she intended to continue being. Darius Fell received a wire transfer from the account under the family name and was not heard from again, which was the arrangement they had always had, and the arrangement that suited both of them. Marcus Webb submitted his final billing statement in the 3rd month and called her once, briefly, to say that the federal case was proceeding in a way that he expected would result in significant sentences across all primary defendants, and that she should expect to be called as a trial witness no sooner than 18 months from now. She thanked him, and he said it was his job, and she said she knew, and he said good. And they ended the call with the particular mutual respect of 2 people who went through something difficult together and remain in each other's good opinion without needing to make more of it than it is. She did not grant interviews. 3 journalists contacted her in the first 2 months, framing her story in the language of victory and vindication, and she declined all of them because victory was not the accurate word, and vindication was not a thing she was interested in being seen to require. What had happened was not a victory. It was a correction. A long, expensive, exhausting correction of a wrong that should not have been possible to commit in the first place. And that had been possible because she had spent 9 years building systems for a man she had married at 26, when she did not yet fully understand that intelligence is not the same as judgment, and that understanding a system is not the same as understanding the person operating it. She understood both now. The day of Lucien's federal sentencing was a Thursday in late March, 7 months after the divorce hearing. The courtroom on South Dearborn was the same one. Different configuration. Criminal proceeding rather than civil. The gallery fuller. The atmosphere carrying the particular weight of an ending rather than a decision. She sat in the 3rd row on the left side with Webb beside her and reviewed quarterly earnings reports on her tablet. Not as a performance of indifference, but because the earnings reports needed to be reviewed and the time was available, and because sitting in that room looking at the man who had spent 9 years rewriting her work and 6 weeks trying to destroy her life was not something she was willing to give more of herself than the situation required. She was there because the record required her presence. She was working because the company required her attention. Both things were true simultaneously, and she had stopped pretending they needed to be reconciled. Lucien looked at her twice. The first time was when he entered the courtroom and his eyes moved across the gallery in the automatic survey of a man who has spent his life reading rooms. She did not look up from the tablet. The second time was at the moment of sentencing, when the judge read the term, 15 years federal, no parole, the full weight of fraud, conspiracy, perjury, extortion, money laundering, and the coordinated use of judicial process to harm a private individual. And something in the reading of it made Lucian turn his head toward the gallery as if looking for a witness to the size of what was being taken from him. She felt him looking. She let 3 seconds pass. Then she looked up. She looked at him for exactly as long as it took to confirm that she saw him and that what she saw did not require a response. And then she looked back at the quarterly earnings report, where the Q2 projections for the encrypted infrastructure division were tracking 11% above forecast because the new algorithm had done what she had designed it to do. She heard the gavel. She finished the page she was reading. Outside the courthouse, the March air was cold in the way of a season that has not yet decided to become something else. Still winter in its bones, spring only in the quality of the light, which was thin and clear and came in at an angle that made the buildings along South Dearborn look cleaner than they were. She stood on the top step for a moment, the way she had stood in the service corridor on the 38th floor of the Dragotech building, in the space between one thing completing and the next thing beginning, and she let herself be in it without trying to name it. It was not relief. Relief implies the removal of something that should not have been there, and what she had carried for the past 7 months had been hers to carry. She had built it, or she had built the conditions that made it necessary, and she was not interested in a version of this moment that pretended otherwise. It was not triumph. Triumph requires a vanquished thing worth vanquishing, and Lucien Dragovich in an orange prison uniform going through a side door of a federal courthouse was not a vanquished king. He was a man who had made a sequence of choices that he had believed his intelligence entitled him to make, and he had been wrong, and the consequences were the consequences. What it was, she decided, standing on the courthouse steps in the thin March light, with the city moving around her in its indifferent Thursday way, was simple. It was simple in the way that things become simple after they've been complex for long enough. Not easy, not without cost, but resolved. The equation complete. The proof holding. She walked down the steps and turned north on Dearborn and pulled her coat closed against the wind off the lake, which came in from the east at this hour and had a temperature in it that cleaned the thinking out and left something quieter behind. Her phone was in her pocket. She did not take it out. She walked 2 blocks and then stopped at a coffee cart on the corner and bought a cup of drip coffee for $2 and stood on the sidewalk drinking it in the cold, watching the intersection manage itself. The lights cycling, the pedestrians moving, the cabs and the delivery trucks, and the city maintenance vehicles all operating in the intricate and unremarkable coordination of a system that does not know it is a system. She thought about the water stain on the ceiling of the studio apartment on West Monroe Street, which she had vacated 6 weeks ago when the asset recovery allowed her to secure a temporary corporate apartment on the 23rd floor of a building on Wacker. She thought about the drip machine from Walgreens. She thought about the strip of light under the bathroom door of a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and cold water, and a scratched mirror, and the decision to go back to work. She finished the coffee. The cup was thin cardboard, and her hands were cold enough that the warmth of it had mattered, which was the kind of small material fact that she had learned in the past 7 months to notice and not dismiss. The warmth of a $2 coffee in cold hands, the specific quality of thin March light on a Thursday morning. Priya Anand's hands, steady, in an institutional waiting room. Marcus Webb, unhurried, in every room he entered, the things that held. She set the empty cup in the recycling bin at the corner and walked north toward the building that had her name on the executive roster and her algorithm in its servers and 11% above forecast in its Q2 projections and 34 people who had been hired because of the quality of their answers. And she walked at the pace of someone who knows where she is going and is not in a hurry to perform the knowing of it. And the city moved around her the way it always had, without sentiment, without ceremony, grinding forward in the October and the March, and every weather between them, indifferent to what any individual within it had survived or built or lost or reclaimed. She did not look back toward the courthouse. There was nothing behind her that required looking at anymore. The wind off the lake came in one more time, sharp and clean, and she put her head down into it and kept walking, And the city closed around her the way cities close around people who belong to them, which is to say completely, which is to say without even noticing it has done so.